If we turn this thing broadside to the storm, the waves are gonna swamp us.
Then turn it fast. You're a Coast Guard and her dad needs a rescue. Go rescue him.
Cold Fear is a game that superficially ticks a lot of boxes for me. It's Resident Evil on a boat before Resident Evil on a boat. But there's also Russians to shoot, a damsel in distress, and stormy seas. Not to mention plenty of mechanics that have extremely niche use cases, all wrapped up in a biological threat originating from the deep. This one's gonna be a hell of a ride. Before I can even get into Cold Fear's history, I need to actually go over how to run the damn thing. Unless you own a PS2, Xbox Original, or emulation software, the only way to play Cold Fear is through the Steam release. And while it will technically run right off the store, there are some issues to be ironed out. Starting by limiting your frames to 60 FPS to avoid animation bugs. You'll have to do this in your GPU control panel. Cold Fear's max resolution is 1600 by 1200, but a widescreen fix exists, and I recommend using it. Super easy to install. Drag and drop into the game's install folder and you're good. Cinematics will be stretched and there will be some pop-in on the sides, but I was able to overlook these issues. Try not to alt-tab, else your screen could look like this. While Cold Fear does have controller support, it's effectively non-functional, at least for me. It relies on direct input, the predecessor to modern X input. The game can't understand a controller made after like 2005. Except for maybe those sub-annihilating Logitech controllers. There are workarounds though. I tried using a bizarre combination of DS for Windows and X-Pattern to get my PS5 controller to work. Alternatively, you can try mapping individual keys to buttons in the game's control configurations, but I couldn't get that to work properly. Hence my jank solution. And it was only temporary too. 5 minutes into the game, I couldn't unpause. I was instead forced to use mouse and keyboard. The horror. Additional fixes exist that affect gameplay along with a reshader, but I found those to be unnecessary. The extended edition is probably the mod that most people will want because it increases movement speed and max ammo. I certainly would have appreciated being able to trudge through the ship at a faster pace. Now that we've gotten the technical issues out of the way, let's talk about the game's history. Released March 15th, 2005, Cold Fear is the product of Darkworks. They are famously the creators of Alone in the Dark 4, the PS2 version of Gra, and a handful of cancelled titles. They even worked on I Am Alive, that kind of mid-post-apocalyptic game from 2012. In the sense that they seem to have created part of the name and concept before Ubisoft switched developers to their in-house Shanghai studio. What I'm getting at is Darkworks doesn't have much of a legacy besides this game. It's the only original IP they released during their time as a functioning studio. Hell, it's one of the only horror titles published by Ubisoft. The only other one I could find is Zombie U. Most collective knowledge we have about Cold Fear is sourced from one GameSpot dev diary featuring a bunch of team leads and a handful of previews. Hell, if you read the development section on the Wikipedia page, you've basically read the dev diary in full. Doing this for as long as I have, you begin to notice trends in the amount of information available to the public in regards to development. Ubisoft tends to be very tight-lipped in about how their games are actually made. Wonder why? Although I did find a worth-playing interview with the co-founders of Darkworks from December of 2004 that helps shed some light on Cold Fear's history and inspirations. I wasn't expecting Perfect Storm, but that tracks. The total development time for Cold Fear seems to be about 2 to 3 years. I'm not French, so I'm gonna butcher this, but Guillaume Garand states that the first prototype lasted 5 months and was made with a group of 10 people. He says this was at the beginning of 2003, and I'm not sure if this is when the project began or ended. I'm going off the assumption that this is when the project began development, meaning the prototype would have been finished sometime in mid-2003, but understand that this is likely an inaccurate time frame. I imagine from there this prototype was refined and then shown to publishers in the hopes of being funded. This leads to a clarifying statement as to when Ubisoft picked up Cold Fear for publishing. When Cold Fear was announced at E3 2004, it was a name in a list of upcoming titles. A Sony webpage at the time had listed Namco as the game's apparent publisher. People ran with that until Ubi announced in October of 2004 that they were publishing Cold Fear. Antoine Valette states that they presented Cold Fear to Ubisoft in early 2004 and the game was greenlit. So it seems like Namco was never involved beyond maybe Darkworks presenting the prototype to them. It's kind of fascinating how this one minor falsehood has managed to perpetuate over 20 years because no one bothered to read the interview that corrected the record. Makes you wonder. To go back to the GameSpot dev diary, the only thing I want to highlight at the moment is that they created a custom editor for the RenderWare engine. This allowed them to simulate accurate movements of a vessel during a storm, movements that character animations would have to compensate for. This is both impressive and has lasting consequences for Cold Fear. Overall, this game was a commercial failure. A massive one if you only look at the US numbers. But those 70,000 US sales were not even 1/5 of the 500,000 worldwide sales. So while it was absolutely a commercial failure, it wasn't nearly as bad as some sources would lead you to believe. Anyway, let's start talking about the visuals. Visually, Cold Fear is aiming for realism at the end of the original Xbox's life cycle. So it feels nostalgic to me in some ways and appropriately janky in others. The camera is the most representative visual aspect of how weird this game is conceptually. Cold Fear does something I have never seen in another survival horror game. It combines fixed camera angles and classic third-person action. This design choice alone makes Cold Fear worth talking about. It both works and does not. I personally love the use of fixed angles in video games. They allow designers to hide things just out of view and force the player to often venture into the unknown to make progress. Cold Fear uses this to its benefit at least once. But then there will be a sudden jarring change to a more classic third-person action camera, until you decide to aim your weapon where it becomes Resident Evil 4. It's incredibly jarring as someone who likes these games to see these techniques used in tandem. I can't think of another game that does. But from a gameplay perspective, I really appreciated that RE4 aiming mode in tight hallways. The movement and animations are something I should mention because you'll be seeing them a lot. And I'm not just talking about player movement. The ship moving around affects everything about how you move and fight. Enemies will stumble with the ship's movements, objects will sway about, and even the bodies on the ground will shift around in response to the waves. It was mentioned during the dev diary, but because the ship was in constant motion, each character needed animations to account for these semi-random movements of the boat. Ultimately, the main character, Hansen, would have over 250 animations separated into base animations and animations compensating for movement. Though they might have wanted to take a second look at these aiming animations. And that's just Hansen. Every enemy and NPC needed to have multitudes of animations to account for every movement. That takes precious development time, and it becomes obvious that the team didn't have the time to create their full vision. Like I said before, lasting consequences. I do want to make a special note about the enemy design. The zombie-looking guys are generic, but just about every other enemy is horrifying in their own way. Some are humanoid, but others are distinctly not. Some were created in labs, but only the deep knows what created the others. Oh, and the mirrors work! Another small part of why I love games from the early to mid 2000s. See, back then, games didn't look as good, so it didn't cost a metric shit ton of computing power to render the same room twice. Combine this with a small viewing area, a static background, and a model that mimics the inputs of the player, and you have yourself a convincing reflection. Now that shit is the realm of ray tracing, magic I don't fully understand. The soundscape of Cold Fear exists? I have very little good to say. The music is there. It's usually appropriate to its setting, but I have a very hard time recalling any of it without listening to tracks on YouTube. Not even the main theme is memorable. Sorry, Tom Salta, this isn't your best work. But I hope it managed to pay the bills while you did projects like Red Steel, From Dust, and Hawks. Does anybody else remember Hawks? The credits also use Marilyn Manson's Use Your Fist and Not Your Mouth, which completely caught me off guard. It's not the first time I've been Mansoned, but I sure was not expecting it from the French. Cold Fear's voice acting is often laughable. I could do a better Russian accent than Yusupov, and my accent is shit. But hiring Russians to voice the rando Russians was a good move. Their lines sparked the Call of Duty 4 zone of my gray matter. Hansen always delivers his lines in this authoritative yet stilted manner that bugs me throughout the entire game. Which sucks because the man talks a fair bit and he's also uninteresting as a character. The in-game sounds are generally non-offensive, with only the deep-sea creature shrieks being a source of mild annoyance. Though I do take minor offense from the sounds coming from the AK. I don't know about you, but this weapon doesn't inspire Soviet oppression in me. Okay, I have to give at least one compliment in order to end this section. I like the ambient noises. The ship alarms in the background often did a very good job at creating an unsettling atmosphere, and the rain at least adds some kind of variation to the soundscape outside combat. But the gameplay is really what we should be talking about, because just about every aspect of Cold Fear's gameplay is weird. For starters is the fact that this is an action horror game trying to be a survival horror game. There's no inventory, no save points, and the greatest puzzle is trying to remember where you are on the boat, because there's no map to quickly reference. Technically, there is one to find on a wall in game, but that doesn't travel with me. And I didn't realize that there was a map of the boat in the manual until I was writing the script. Plus, that's only a half solution because there's no map of the second area in the manual! I instead had to make do by looking at the Cyrillic on the walls, and reading the translation in the bottom corner. My rant aside, there's a number of weirdly specific mechanics on Cold Fear, like a grab mechanic and a stamina bar for holding onto rails during rough bits of the storm. You're actually liable to slip and slide off the side of the boat if you aren't careful. Enemies can be shoved away if they get too close, something I rarely did because I forgot the mechanic existed. The vessel itself can be used to your advantage as well. Shooting different valves can cause hot steam or flaming gas to burst into hallways. Barrels obviously go boom, but so do extinguishers. There are even electrical transformers that can be destroyed. Doing so exposes bare cables and electrifies any water it touches. There's even a crouch mechanic that is employed at least twice by the game. Laser ducking on a moving ship is fun. It actually comes in handy when you're taking cover from the frightened Russians on board. The Ruskies are trigger happy and I don't blame them. I've seen what they're fighting. The weaponry is surprisingly varied, especially considering how none of these weapons share ammo. There are 7 weapons consisting of a handgun, shotgun, MP5, AK-47, grenade launcher, flammenwerfer, and a spear gun. The most unique of these weapons is that spear gun. Contrary to my expectations of sticking zombies to walls, it acts as an enemy distractor. I used it maybe twice because any other weapon was more useful than the spear gun. Thus, not all these weapons were created equal. The lack of a flashlight on some weapons is understandable but annoying in the dark depths of a sea vessel. What really sucks is the lack of a laser sight on some weapons. Due to the absence of an aiming reticle, this laser sight is what you must rely upon to accurately aim your weapons. The shotgun lacks such a laser. I have to wait until an enemy is basically point blank for it to actually hit. Ammo is going to be scarce, so make sure you loot every body that you see. Not to mention health kits. There are clinics and armories to find, but you won't always have access to them. Plus, their supplies are limited, so be careful not to exhaust them early. Before moving away from the weaponry, I do want to point out a major problem I was having with Cold Fear in regards to the mouse and keyboard controls. While using automatic weapons, the game would sometimes register a single click as holding down the button. This would cause me to start uncontrollably blasting for a second or two before I got it under control or ran out of ammo in the mag. I tested this using 2 different mice with the same result, so it's not a hardware issue. It wasn't game ruining, but it happened often enough to be a major annoyance throughout my entire experience. I already talked about the camera during the visual section, but I also want to talk about the gameplay implications of the camera. Changing between fixed angles and over the shoulder sounds great in theory and doesn't work well in practice. Any tension from a fixed camera angle is lost when I get a clear view of my surroundings. What's more frustrating is that Darkworks refuses to commit to the fixed angle or the generic third-person camera. For the whole game, you'll be rotating between camera angles ad nauseum. I really wish they had stuck with one camera type and allowed you to do RE4 aiming, even if the tension would have been lost. I did mention earlier how there were no save points, but there are still saves. The saves are at checkpoints at the beginning of every chapter, level, encounter. I'm really not sure how to describe the game's structure due to its lack of one. What I can describe is my feeling of frustration not knowing which door is going to throw a save screen at my face. Which means during my exploration, I'm accidentally making progress and potentially locking myself out of content. I don't think that happened, but there was the potential to do so, and I don't like that. I never played Alone in the Dark 4, but can someone please tell me if it had a similar save system? I want to know if this is a legacy problem or just part of Cold Fear's jank. After everything I've described, it would seem like I have an incredibly negative view of Cold Fear. But here's the thing. I kind of enjoyed the gameplay despite the jank. There's something so sincere about devoting development time to having a minor mechanic like gripping the rails to keep your balance. Most other games would have some kind of minigame or QuickTime event. But no, Darkworks was like, we're going to make a mechanic, specific animations to make it look good, and devote testing time to make sure everything runs smoothly. Even if it can be argued that was a misuse of development time, I think such an attitude shows care toward what they were making. The developers wanted you to be so immersed in their product that they actually wanted you to hold on for dear life. I can't help but respect it. Cold Fear's story is certainly one of those mid-2000s action games. Bland characters with no personality and arguably awful dialogue. While the majority of the story plays out through cutscenes, there are clarifying collectibles to claim. These run the gamut from memos to technical documents. These are where the real meat of the story is told, along with the contents of the manual. What's on screen is often confusing without the context provided by reading. The only thing you'll know for certain is that Tom Hansen is a member of the US Coast Guard and is stuck on a Russian boat after some SEALs couldn't hack it. Now's about time to hop off the ride if you want to avoid spoilers, because I gotta talk about the details of Cold Fear's plot. The game begins with a cutscene on the Eastern Spirit, a Russian whaler in the Bering Sea. A group of Navy SEALs makes their way on board under the directive of CIA agent Jason Bennett. Less than a minute later, they're all dead. The CIA decides to go with their plan B, the USS Ravenswood, a Coast Guard cutter with 4 dudes, including main character Tom Hansen. He's apparently a former US Army Special Forces, and the last surviving American on the ship based off that radio chatter. Trapped on the whaler, Tom makes his way inside to find 2 friendly Russians trying to break down a door. Hansen's arrival prompts them to spread Slavic cheer through the use of explosively propelled lead. Once the pair are dealt with, a woman begins demanding to be let out. Too bad the door is locked. Hansen continues to explore the ship, doming Russians left and right. Eventually he finds the body of his superior, Lieutenant Lansing, in a bathroom stall. It is here where we get our first proper introduction to this game's enemies. Cold Fear's creatures stand out from the usual suspects because they technically aren't zombies. These bodies are being controlled by deep-sea parasitic organisms called exocells. It is a horrifying process to read about. These creatures were awakened when the Star of Sakhalin began deep-sea mining operations. Yusupov, the Russian mobster in charge of the mining rig, recognized their value and hired scientists like Viktor Kamsky to experiment on the organisms, using them to infect some 300 different creatures in total. Obviously, things have not gone according to plan since non-test subjects have been infected by exocells and are now killing everything to create more hosts. We got ourselves a Dead Space situation predating Dead Space by 3 years. And you know that means I'm preemptively desecrating every corpse I can find. Since the stakes have now been dramatically raised, Hansen makes his way to the ship's radio room to Mayday for help. Unfortunately, Hansen only gets Agent Bennett, who orders him to find Yusupov for questioning. Bennett is in your ear for the rest of the game, and he's a real dick for no reason. Finding Yusupov is harder than necessary because of no map, but I found him after wandering for 20 minutes. He tells you to find Anna for answers, throws you a spear gun, and refuses to elaborate before an exocell chest bursts out of him. This character was on screen for all of 34 seconds before he fucking explodes. Searching his body results in a diary with all the exposition this guy was probably supposed to drop, but didn't for whatever reason. Like their animation team was too busy on character animations to make cutscenes. Lasting consequences. Anyway, this diary explains that Anna is the daughter of Viktor Kamsky, the scientist in charge of exocell experimentation. Anna was brought along to persuade Viktor to work with the mob. Finding her in the closet begins Cold Fear's obligatory mid-2000s escort mission. It is mercifully short because the radio room is not that far away. TLDR of this cutscene is Pavel answers the phone, says the oil rig is in chaos, and tells Anna not to return. Bennett, meanwhile, gives Hansen new orders. Point the ship at the Star of Sakhalin and find Viktor Kamsky. I love Bennett's response to Hansen's complaints. Such a smarmy asshole. What follows is a half-hour detour to find the captain's body. The coordinates to the oil rig are locked in his cabin, and the captain went scurrying off to the ass end of the ship when things started going south. When Hansen does get the coordinates, their means of entry onto the platform is less than ideal, as in jump on the platform from the crow's nest as the ship collides into a support pillar. Hansen manages to get on board, but Anna is not so lucky. She ends up in the icy waters of the Bering Sea. Hansen dives in after her, only to be rewarded with an exocell infection. Hansen, ever the professional, continues on his mission. There's a radio jammer on board that needs to be disabled to contact Bennett. Thankfully, Deus Ex Pavel is around the corner to help Hansen through his infection. After supplying the cure, P. Squiddy explains that to access the jammer, Hansen will need the retinas of Security Chief Anishinenko. Chekhov's Pavel is then dragged into a nearby air duct by some kind of exocell. What an amazing character. I loved how he was on screen for less than 2 minutes and existed just to exposition dump and die. Traveling on, Hansen is introduced to the first of what I deem the weirdos. The other enemies were straightforward zombies, sometimes with guns, sometimes a bit fresher than their friends. But the rig is where the exocell experimentation was taking place. So we have quadrupedal exoshades crawling along ceilings, hulking exomasses, nests of exocells, and even invisible exospecters. All creatures that often take significantly more ammo to take down than their zombie friends. Side note, but the exospecter is both my bane and my favorite enemy. Cold Fear requires you to pay attention to your surroundings in order to pinpoint these suckers. And sometimes they'll be in rooms you assume are safe because you had just come through not that long ago. With the weirdos in play, the regular Russians stand no chance. You manage to find where the survivors are holed up and they don't take kindly to an unannounced American visitor. So we started blasting, until Hansen is the only one left standing. He then rips out the eye of the Russian he needed to find. I guess that's easier than lugging around a head. Destroying that radio jammer is easy enough when you know where to look and what to shoot. I didn't and left the room, which led to a 10-minute detour where I figured out what to do. If you have not figured out by now, that's a very common theme with my experience in Cold Fear. While all of this is happening, apparently Anna has been floating in the Bering Sea. Water that is typically 40 to 60 degrees Fahrenheit in August, the warmest time of year. And your average human being can only survive in 40-degree waters for 10 to 15 minutes before succumbing to hypothermia. This bitch fell in the water about an hour ago in-game time. No way in hell is she alive enough for her mutant daddy to pluck her from the sea for a quick exocell infection. Yeah, that big boy is Dr. Kamsky, who turns out has lost his damn mind. He engineered this entire mess by freeing the exocells and deliberately infecting himself to further evolution. TLDR, crazy man gotta die now and his daughter needs to inject bleach. Hansen's new mission is to find the antidote and transmit Kamsky's lab data to Bennett. Should be easy enough as long as he doesn't fall down a flesh tube, get knocked unconscious, and reinfected by another exocell. Oops. At least we get a good look at Papa while he hibernates in the wall. This design looks so alien yet familiar that it genuinely disturbs me a bit. But I power through, eventually finding that antidote for Anna in a lab. Under the sea. But Hansen is left with the classic dilemma of 2 patients, 1 cure. He chooses to cure Anna at his own expense before setting off to find that lab data. When he does, he pulls a fast one on Bennett, sending him only the antidote data. Bennett rages, but Hansen has seen enough today to know that the CIA of all organizations doesn't need access to a mind-controlling parasitic organism. Anna soon contacts Hansen, requesting that he help her blow this godforsaken oil rig to bits. Doing so requires one last lap of the Star of Sakhalin to place C4 charges in precise points for maximum destruction, like this underwater tunnel. One of the only times I died outside of the final boss was right here because I delayed like half a second in running away from the wall of water. With the bombs exploding, Anna and Hansen make for the convenient helicopter that Anna learned to fly. Once they arrive, Papa Kamsky makes his dramatic return to the story for an awful boss fight. You're supposed to shoot Kamsky to distract him while Anna does some technical bullshit to justify her presence. Otherwise, Papa will just grab her and it's game over. I failed like 3 times in a row before I figured that out. And then I had to deal with the rest of the boss fight. His attacks are difficult to dodge and will send you flying away, potentially taking even more damage if you hit a wall. And if you fail at any point, you must start the entire fight over, despite there being a perfect place to put a checkpoint in the middle of the fight. Such a baffling design decision. This fight is terrible. I hate it. At least the very last part of the game. Papa is defeated and Hansen escapes with Anna aboard the chopper. There's even a cool scene where they fly away from the explosion. An awkward pause into a smash cut later and the credits roll on Cold Fear to the tune of Marilyn Manson. There's just one small, glaring plot hole that you may have noticed. Hansen's still infected with an exocell! One that is liable to explode out of him any minute on that chopper. Hansen's second infection is just glossed over for the sake of brevity. Likely because this game needed to ship, and they spent so much time working on animations that they had no time to implement the entire story. Part of me refuses to believe that Antoine Villette was foolish enough to forget such a crucial detail of his own story. But seeing as Cold Fear is one of his only writing credits, this treads more water than I would like to admit. Also, wait, now that I think about it, why did that exocell explode out of Yusupov? Shouldn't have just taken over his body like normal? Ah, screw it, this story sucks. It's on the border of so bad it's good, but its visa's been denied. At least its gameplay is fun. To wrap things up, Cold Fear is a weirdo game for weirdos like me. There's an insane combination of attention to detail and lack thereof throughout all of Cold Fear. The shooting can be on the simpler side at times, but there's a wide range of weirdly specific mechanics that I can't help but find charming. All while a pretty terrible plot is stringing together gameplay sequences. But it's the kind of terrible that's genuine in its delivery, resulting in something I consider to be on the cusp of so bad it's good territory. Plus, there's also the whole matter of having to fiddle with the game too. I would say that Cold Fear is a cautious recommendation from me. Look, I may have enjoyed this game's shenanigans, but I bet like 90% of people will bounce off this game within 30 minutes. If you do want to play Cold Fear, you can find it on Steam for $10 at full price, but it also goes on sale for $2 all the time. I would personally wait for that sale, but you do you. I've got a park to run in the meantime. Thanks for watching. More garbage to come.